Hello and good morning, everybody. This is Scott Hartley from thedailyvision.com, and today I'll be doing a comparison between Hostgator and DigitalOcean for your website hosting. DigitalOcean is a VPS hosting, and Hostgator does shared hosting and VPS. I'm going to do I wouldn't say a three-way comparison, but it'll be a comparison between the shared hosting and the VPS hosting from Hostgator to the VPS hosting from DigitalOcean. So let's just quickly start with the WordPress hosting and go over, not the WordPress hosting, the shared hosting right now. Shared hosting means you're on a server with a lot of other websites. You have basically unlimited everything. You have no limits on really anything. It's meant for basically starting websites so they can get away with doing smaller amounts of money and smaller amounts of they can get away with unlimited storage and bandwidth because most websites won't use that much. It's a really great deal when you're starting out, but you'll normally run into performance issues later down the line. Typically, your best thing to do if you have little technical know-how and you're brand new, grab a shared hosting. I did another comparison between GoDaddy shared hosting and HostGator shared hosting, and you can check that out somewhere around here. And HostGator has a really good shared hosting plan. It's kind of gone down with their customer support, though, ever since they were bought out, but it's still got a really decent hosting plan. Then we have VPS hosting. Well, I suppose I should do the comparison for him. Well, if you're on a WordPress site and you ever know anything about caching, with shared hosting, you can't do anything like APC, object caching, database caching, unless you want your website to be slow as balls. So typically the best thing to do is to avoid any larger projects on shared hosting. If you got brand new projects and you're just working on them, then you'll want to start out here. DigitalOcean, on the other hand, is a little bit better in every regard, but I think it's fair if we compare the VPS hosting. So your cheapest plan is a 0.5 core CPU. You get 512 megabytes of RAM, 25 gigabytes of disk space, and 500 gigabytes of bandwidth. On DigitalOcean, and by the way, this plan costs $20 a month. On DigitalOcean, you can get one for $5 with essentially the same resources with a little bit less disk space, and if you hook it up to an Amazon Cloud bucket, then you can have a lot more space. Again, if you want to spring for $20, then you get a faster, you essentially get 4 times as much memory. You get 2 cores instead of a 0.5 core, so 4 times the CPU power. I almost doubled the space. Keep in mind that this uses a hard drive, and oh, that's right. If you're using, that's a semi-VPS. You don't even get cPanel. And you get very little of everything else. Now, it is important to state there's a fundamental difference between HostGator VPS and DigitalOcean VPS. DigitalOcean is completely command line. You have to install everything you want to use through a command line. You have to install the operating system into your droplets. You have to install WordPress. You have to install it all manually, as opposed to this, which you start out with Virtuoso, or you can get cPanel. You could, in theory, install cPanel on DigitalOcean. However, you have to pay for it, which is, I wouldn't say expensive, but it goes up in price. If you go the maximum plan, you get 240 gigabytes of disk space. This is where they kind of start taking off. On DigitalOcean, you don't really get a lot of disk space. If you compare the two highest plans, $160 to $160, you get 2 times the memory, 2 times the cores, but you're only getting half the disk space, but you're getting 2 times the bandwidth. And it's important to, well, you also get basically as many IPs that you need, but that's not the point. The problem that you're running into here is on DigitalOcean you don't have a lot of storage space, but it's all on SSD. Well, I'm pretty sure that on HostGators you're doing on regular hard drives, and there's a huge difference. If you ever run your computer on an SSD in comparison to a just a regular hard drive, you'll notice a huge difference in your performance. You also can't really do anything out of the box with these VPS servers. On DigitalOcean, you could set them up pretty much any way you want. You could do almost whatever you really want with them. You just say, oh, I want to spin them up and use a network file system. Go ahead and do that. Um, do you need to spend $640 a month for 640 gigs of SSD? That's the one thing that they're kind of lacking. A 20-core processor. 64 gigs of memory. Before anyone says that's not possible, it technically is. It is. It's possible. They also charge by hourly, meaning if it goes down, they'll if it's down, they won't charge you for that time. For anyone worried about things like bandwidth limits, a terabyte of bandwidth is incredibly hard to use. I manage a website, and it's GameOgre.com, and they don't even use a terabyte, and it's a big website. Very, very big website. Yeah, never really worry about a terabyte for your transfer. You'll never worry about that unless you're just streaming videos after video and large amounts of video content. But if you're having a lot of amounts of video content, the chances are you're going to run out of hard drive space before you run out of bandwidth space. So what I can really say is, here's the difference. If you have zero skill with anything, and you just don't know a single thing about hosting or VPS or how to do anything with the command line, and you have no interest in learning, and would rather just throw more money at it, you'll want to go with Hostgators or another equivalent, where they're essentially managing it and they make it easier through cPanel, and it's a little bit easier. Great support, etc., etc. With full root access, you're able to install and customize any software you want. It's a little difficult, even when they're helping you. You will have to play and you will have to learn how to do it. But a VPS hosting, you'll notice huge differences. Number one, your time to first byte will go down dramatically. The overall load time of things like images and other files loaded on from your server will decrease dramatically. Pretty much everything you could think of will go down dramatically if you use a VPS over a shared hosting. And the best part is, if you're smart about it, you can properly cache things. So if you're using BuddyPress, chances are you realize you can't use page caching with it. Then you're recommended to use object caching. Object caching and database caching are not to ever be run from disk. With Minify and page caching, they should always be run from disk. Object caching and database caching never run from disk. And the fundamental problem with that is they're individual pieces. They're the queries that the page makes. And when you try to put them on the disk, you'll actually notice your load time will go down dramatically rather than improving because your disk is slow. With an SSD, the page load time, the physical page from page caching, will go down. But if you try to load all those queries from the page cache, it'll be slower than running them straight from PHP. And even though PHP sucks as a whole in performance, well, PHP 7 is actually doing very well. You just can't run them all from disk. Even with an SSD, it's still smart to run them from a caching like APC or Memcache or some kind of equivalent. APC caching and Memcache are essentially just memory caching. They cache items into memory. You specify, like, I'm going to give 200 megs of memory for all my processes, and APC was like, okay, and it caches them in there, and it saves them, and then whenever they're requested, they're loaded from memory because they're already in there. Other than that, there's no real need to be on a VPS unless you're doing a high. If you're doing something completely ridiculous that just requires an exuberant amount of resources and you have a ton of users on constantly, there's only one real option for you, and that is good old-fashioned dedicated hosting. I haven't really looked into a lot of these, but you definitely have decent options. Of course, for a dedicated server here, it's a little ridiculous in price, but it's also very powerful. Now, I will not lie, my processor is faster than this one on their highest plan, and I have more memory. Shit, I could just host my server from my computer at this point. I'm just kidding. Don't ever do that. Don't ever house your computer or your network hosting a website. Your ISP will get pissed. There you go. The overall comparison. Things you can take away easily. If you're on a basic new website, go with shared hosting so you can get the basic feel of it. If you're doing something that requires more resources, like a huge buddy press or a forums, you may want to consider using a VPS server. If you're using anything that's a little ridiculous for VPS, you'll want to move to dedicated. However, in most cases, I recommend just grabbing a DigitalOcean VPS server. It's cheap, they work very well, and you get a lot for your plan. The only downside is they don't offer a lot of disk space and they don't offer ways to add on to it. And they've been saying for the past 2 years that they would be looking for a way to add more disk space to your plans if you don't need more resources. And so far we've gotten nothing. Thank you so very much for watching. Please stay tuned for the next video. I'll probably include links to the Hostgator and DigitalOcean below. There'll probably be affiliate links. You probably won't like it. I'll include the links without the affiliate below it. So thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned for the next video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, put them below and I'll make sure to help you out. Thank you very much for watching.